Hello and welcome to new ASMR video in which I will be talking about first humans on Earth. The story of humanity begins with our earliest human ancestors that were very much like apes who appeared in Africa around 7 million years ago. But the first modern humans developed only about 200,000 years ago. They spread throughout the globe, starting out as isolated bands of hunters, but eventually they settled in farming villages, and later they found small towns and cities. Stone tools were replaced by metal, and around 8,000 years ago, villages began to grow into cities. By 500 years before Common Era, the new classical period had begun, in which advanced cultures across the globe created great empires with cities full of magnificent buildings and made enormous strides in human knowledge. Around 2.6 million years ago, one human-like species, Homo habilis, began to use stones as tools. For more than 2.5 million years after this, people lived in small groups, hunting with stone axes and spears, and gathering roots, berries, and other plants. They lived in caves or shelters made of branches, and they used fire to cook. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, spread from Africa across the globe. Their most successful migration began around 60,000 years ago, when there was ice age on Earth. They were highly intelligent and adaptable, and they replaced the Neanderthals in Europe. They built boats to reach Australia, and they crossed the frozen ocean to North America in about 15,000 years before Common Era. These early humans developed sophisticated stone tools. They invented the bow and arrow and created the first musical instruments. About 8,000 years ago, humans began to form larger groups and settle in villages. They built houses out of whatever material were available nearby. Most villagers farmed the surrounding land. Since time previously spent hunting was freed up, specialists such as potters, builders, and priests appeared. Here we can see some houses from that era. In Turkey, mud brick houses built close together. In Cyprus, round houses built of stone. And in Scotland, long family houses made of wood and sod or lawn. In Scotland, they also had stone houses that even had stone beds. The first cities emerged around 4,000 years before Common Era in Mesopotamia, that is modern Iraq, and in Egypt. The great rivers of these areas made the land fertile and prosperous, providing enough food to support larger communities of people living together. The rulers of some of these early cities become wealthy and powerful, taking control of surrounding lands to build the first kingdoms, and some sent their armies to conquer neighboring states, creating the first empires. The first cities of Mesopotamia were built by a people called the Sumerians, and they grew rich thanks to new farming methods and more productive crops. This allowed them to build temples and palaces in mini kingdoms or city-states such as Uruk or Nippur and Lagash. They were soon followed by cities in other regions such as Egypt. The invention of writing around 3,100 years before the Common Era made it easier for rulers to keep records and for merchants to trade. On this picture we can see ruins of Karnak, temple complex in Egypt. The ancient Egyptians were capable of creating large-scale buildings, as these ruins of Karnak shows us. People begin to make simple metal tools around 7,000 years before Common Era. Copper was used first, with cold working by hammering off copper or gold, and this is the first type of metal working. Later on, about 5,500 years before Common Era, copper smelting or heating of ores to extract pure metal appears in Middle East. Copper was used first, and later they mixed it with tin to make bronze, and that was a harder metal suitable for armor and weapons. In the year 3200 before Common Era, they start with the molding of molten metal in Mesopotamia. And then in the year 3000 before Common Era, they created bronze. (1,300 years before Common Era in Egypt, furnaces with bellows carry the heat needed for iron smelting, and then they start to use iron. Farming around 11,000 years before Common Era, when communities in the Fertile Crescent, that is an area of the Middle East, began. And then they sow and harvest wild rice seeds. Gradually, farmers developed more productive crops and also tamed animals such as cattle and sheep. As the food supply became more reliable, larger villages and small towns appeared. Here we can see an early plow with stone or metal blade for cutting through the soil, and yoke that have been attached to shoulders of an ox. On this picture we can see the early kingdoms on the earth. Early civilizations varied widely. Some were empires united by a strong ruler, and others were alliances of city-states. Around 3,100 years before Common Era, ancient Egypt was united to create an advanced civilization that would last for 3,000 years. Here were Indus Valley, around 2,600 years before Common Era. Large cities rose on the river Indus, and they shared a system of trade and writing, but they did not form an empire. Here in the Middle East, Sargon of Akkad unite rival city-states around 2,300 years before Common Era. And it is the founding of the first great empire of the Middle East, Mesopotamia. This area in Anatolia in modern Turkey was ruled by the Hittites, Egyptians from 1800 to 1200 years before Common Era. In today's China, Shang ruled from 1766 to 1122 years before Common Era. And it was Shang China. In Central America, giant pyramid temples built from about 1500 years before Common Era. And it was Olmec Empire, Olmec cities on the coast of Mexico. And here we also have Inca area, where was also one great empire. Around 5,000 years before Common Era, people began building megaliths, and megaliths were large monuments made from huge pieces of stone. They built them mainly in Northern and Western Europe. Their exact purpose is unknown, but many may have functioned as a type of calendar, measuring out the seasons and the passage of the sun and moon. Here are some of these important megaliths mentioned. In Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the oldest, around 8,000 years before Common Era. Then in Carnac, France, is a series of over 3,000 standing stones or menhirs. In Stonehenge, in England, a series of large blue stones form the first circle in around 2,500 years before Common Era. And giant sandstones along with huge stone cross pieces that we can see on this picture were added 200 years later. And also one important megalith is in Newgrange in Ireland. From around 500 years before Common Era, the great civilizations of Greece, Rome, Persia, India, China and Central America reached new levels of power and sophistication. They developed scientific ideas and rich forms of art and writing. New religions emerged, such as Buddhism and Christianity, and these larger empires were able to support larger armies, which led to long and bitter wars, such as those between Rome and Carthage, which is today's Tunis, and those between Greece and Persia. On this picture we can see the areas of some of classical empires. And we can see that the biggest empire was a Persian empire on 3,100,000 square miles. The Roman Empire was vast. Around 2,500,000 square miles. But the Persian Empire ruled vast areas of wilderness lined with important trade routes. And the Roman Empire expanded into busy, populated areas, spreading their culture in the form of laws, art, buildings,